Hello, very good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with Dan Walker and Louise Minchin.
The headlines for you at 6 o'clock this morning. Social gatherings of more than 6 people, both indoors and outdoors, will become illegal in England on Monday as coronavirus cases continue to rise.
Tighter restrictions are introduced in Bolton as the latest figures show the town has the highest rate of COVID-19 in the UK.
Towns in California and Washington state are left in ruins as wildfires rage on the west coast of America.
Good morning. A big jump in the number of job seekers. More people were looking for work in August than at any point in the past 12 years, while the number of vacancies is falling. I'll have an update.
A pilot event with around 3,500 racing fans at Doncaster is set to go ahead today, despite a ban on large social gatherings in England coming into force next week.
And whilst it's another very mild start today for some of you, fresher air on the way for all in the next 24 hours. I'll have details of those weather changes here on Breakfast.
Good morning, it's Wednesday, it's the 9th of September. Top story for you this morning. Social gatherings of more than 6 people will be banned in England from Monday. That's both indoors and outdoors. It's a significant tightening of coronavirus restrictions.
The government is introducing the move following a sharp rise in the number of cases, which the Prime Minister has described as concerning. But there will be some exemptions, as Nick Eardley explains.
Wash your hands, cover your face, make space.
A new campaign by the government to remind us all of the basics to stop the spread of coronavirus. Ministers and experts have become increasingly worried about the number of new cases. And today, new measures are being announced to try to limit social contact.
You could pick up or pass on the virus.
From Monday, in England, gatherings of more than 6 people are being banned by law. The new measures apply indoors and outdoors. Police will be given the power to break up groups, and if people don't comply, they could be fined £100. This will double on each further repeat offence, up to £3,200. Until now, people from 2 households could meet in larger groups, but that's being limited to 6, meaning 2 families of 4 can't all meet at the same time. The new restrictions will apply to hospitality venues like pubs and restaurants, but there will be some exemptions for work and education, and for weddings, funerals and organised team sports. Boris Johnson will be back at the podium in Downing Street later, where he will tell people we need to act now to stop the virus spreading. So we are simplifying and strengthening the rules on social contact, making them easier to understand and for the police to enforce. It is absolutely critical that people now abide by these rules and remember the basics. We've seen tighter rules in a number of areas in recent weeks. Large parts of the north of England, a number of councils in the west of Scotland, Caerphilly in Wales. In Bolton, significant new restrictions have just come into force. Pubs and restaurants have been told they can only serve takeaways. Opening hours have been restricted at night, and people have been banned from socialising with those from outside their household.
The rise in cases in Bolton is partly due to socialising by people in their 20s and 30s. We know this from contact tracing. And through our contact tracing system, we've identified a number of pubs at which the virus has spread significantly.
But from Monday, there will also be new national restrictions for the whole of England, limiting how many people can meet at a time as the government tries to avoid the virus running out of control. Nick Earley, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's get more from our political correspondent, Helen Katz. She is live in Westminster this morning. Good morning to you, Helen. What are we expecting then from the Prime Minister, who will address the nation later?
Yes, we're going to get another one of these prime ministerial press conferences. We haven't had one of those in a while, and he will use it to set out these new rules, but really to ram home that message that we've got to stick to them. So as you heard Nick say there, he is going to say that it is absolutely critical that people now abide by these rules and really focus on the basics, that he is setting this out as a simplifying and a strengthening of the rules on social contact to make them easier to understand and also for the police to enforce. And there has been criticism levelled at the government about how potentially complicated the rules have been getting, because as they've changed, they've become less straightforward than they were, and did people really understand them? So he is going to address that. He's also going to explain a bit more about the reasoning behind it. As he told cabinet ministers yesterday, what the government does not want to see is a repeat of what has been seen in France and Spain, where you start with a rise in the number of infections, that then leads to a rise in the number of hospitalisations, and he will point out later that in Spain there's actually also now a rise in deaths, and that is of course what the government wants to avoid. So this is the point of sort of taking action now, and will really reinforce those messages. We're also going to see, as you heard in Nick's piece there, the launch of a new public information campaign today, that three-word slogan that the government's already started to introduce a while ago, that hands, face, space. We're going to see much more and hear a lot more about that, and there'll be a video released which will also show how the virus spreads exactly indoors, because of course that is the big area of concern as we move into autumn and winter. We're all going to be spending a lot more time inside. The concern is that makes it much easier for the virus to spread.
Helen, thank you very much for the moment. Speak to you a bit later on this morning.
Just to let you know as well, there are so many questions again this morning, aren't there? We need to get to the bottom of what exactly it all means. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, is going to join us around 7:30. I know lots of you have sent in thoughts and questions already. Do send in some more. We'll put them together and try and put as many as we can to him. Yeah, lots of concerns about testing as well. So we'll try and get through as many of them as we can a bit later on in the programme. Elsewhere today, a major trial of the coronavirus vaccine has been put on hold across the world after a volunteer in the UK fell ill. The vaccine, being developed by Oxford University and the drugs company AstraZeneca, is being tested in thousands of people. That's in Britain and in the US, and in smaller groups in Brazil, South America, elsewhere there as well. AstraZeneca described it as a routine pause in the case of an unexplained illness. A safety review will be carried out before the trial can then restart.
Throughout history, there have been many black and brilliantly gifted composers. So why don't we know more about them?
We're setting the record straight, and I have to say, it's about time.
He has the skill to do it, and the daring to do it.
Somehow their story has not been told.
Come on! That's fantastic!
Join Lenny Henry and Susie Klein for Black Classical Music for Forgotten History. Coming soon to BBC4 and iPlayer.
Let's speak to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, who joins us from London this morning. Morning to you, and there's so much to get through, so thanks very much for your time.
Pleasure.
First of all, let's be really clear. What is changing?
The changes we're bringing in, which will come into force on Monday, are that in social settings you can't gather in groups of more than 6. That's it. Really super simple rule. Now, there are a number of exemptions for schools, because we want to protect education, for work, because workplaces already have COVID secure guidelines, and for some very special events like weddings, funerals and christenings. And other than that, the rule's really simple. One of the pieces of feedback we had, including from the police, was that we needed the rules to be super simple so that everybody knows what they are. You can't gather in a group more than 6. And then this will now be rigorously enforced by the police.
How will it be enforced?
Well, you can get a fine of £100 going up to £3,200 for repeat offences. And there was a problem with enforcement of the rules that you could have 2 households together, which is that, how do you define how big a household is? It was more complicated to enforce, but this is really simple. Gatherings are okay. They should be socially distanced, of course, but groups only of up to 6. And we brought in that with a specific number, so that just everybody knows what the score is. And the reason we've brought this in is we've seen that rise in the number of cases that you mentioned. And also, we've seen in other countries around the world where they don't take action, then you end up with this second peak leading to more hospitalisations and more deaths. And we don't want to see that here.
Is this because lockdown was eased too early?
I don't think so, because we brought the number of cases right down, as we've discussed many, many times, and it was low all throughout the summer, which I was really pleased with. But then we have seen this rise just in the last few days, and because our contact tracing system now can tell us where the cases are coming from, where the transmission is likely to be, we've found that most of it is in social settings. Not that much of it actually in the workplace, because those businesses are very, very largely following those COVID secure guidelines. It is largely people socialising, and we've all seen with our eyes that the rules were were not being followed as much. I think the vast majority of people still were, but you could see that that was not happening as clearly. And so we brought in a simpler, clearer set of rules. No gatherings of over 6.
Right. So you talk about social settings, and I know you have specifically talked about pubs, for example, in Bolton.
Yeah.
It's still safe to go to the pub, is it?
Yes, you should go, obviously, in a group of less than 6. And we're also, the Prime Minister will be setting out, we're also going to be tightening some of the enforcement around hospitality businesses to make sure that they are policing the guidelines very clearly, because you've got to have. Not only should you not go to the pub with a group of more than 6, that's your responsibility, but also obviously the pub needs to have each group of 6 separate so that they can't pass the disease from one group to the other. So the business has responsibilities too.
Okay, what about larger families? I mean, somebody might have, I don't know, 2 parents, 3 children. Does that mean they can't see their 2 grandparents together?
I'm afraid that for a family of, say, 5 or 6, this will bring in some significant restrictions. I get that, and we don't do this lightly.
So there's no exception, for example, so you were back to where we were with you can only see 1 grandparent in that case, for example?
In those circumstances, it will bring in more restrictions. I have 3 children. We have a family of 5, and so we'll be able to see 1 other person at a time as a whole family. So absolutely yes. Unfortunately, the nature of the virus is that it thrives on social contact. The goal here is that we're trying to protect education and protect work by stopping this rise that's largely coming through social contact. So of course I understand the impact of this. And of course, if you're in a household where there's more than 6 who live together and share facilities under one roof, then obviously that group will be able to stay together because they live together anyway.
But they can't see anybody else? Is that what you're saying? They can't see anybody else?
Not as a group, no.
What about, for example, people who use grandparents or their grandparents are helping out with childcare?
Well, that is actually a very serious problem in terms of the spread of the disease, because whilst children are hardly affected in terms of getting ill, we know that they can transmit the disease, and we also know that older people, and most grandparents are older, that older people are more likely to die from the disease. So actually, especially with schools back, the transmission of the disease from children to grandparents is one of the things that we're quite worried about clinically. Because, part of the debate in the last few days...
Are you trying to stop then grandparents taking part and helping with childcare when you're trying to get people back to work as well?
I'm not actively trying to do that, but I am explaining that is something that we worry about clinically, because as we've been talking about in the last few days, we've seen that the large part of the rise in the last few days has been amongst younger people. And some people have said, oh, well, that's fine because younger people tend not to die from this disease. But the problem is that they do pass it on in exactly the sort of way that you've described, or whether a teenager to their parents and their parents in turn. So it doesn't matter how old you are. Everybody needs to follow these rules. Just meet up in groups of up to 6. And no more than that. And it's so important that people follow these rules as previously, and we're going to enforce rigorously against them, because we want to see the stop in the rise in the number of cases, and we don't want to get back to having to take more measures, which obviously everybody wants to avoid.
Can we talk about testing? Because we've been having lots of people getting in touch, encountering still serious problems getting tests, OK? This is somebody on Twitter. I'm a teacher. I'm isolating at home. I can't get a test unless I travel from Coventry to Glasgow. Ivor in Birmingham. I ran today for a test for my daughter who has a temperature, told no kits were available. And they go on. So why, and this is from another question from somebody on Twitter, why is this world-beating track and trace system, where is it, after you told us repeatedly testing was the key? What is going on?
So let me explain this very fully and also very firmly for your viewers in terms of who's eligible for a test. There are currently a record number of tests available. Our capacity is higher than it ever has been. It's higher than it was last week. However, we have seen a rise in the number of people who are not eligible for a test coming forward and getting those tests. If you don't have symptoms, unless you've been asked specifically by a clinician or by a local authority to go and get a test, you're not eligible for a test. But we want the test to be available for people with symptoms, precisely like as you described, some of the people who've been contacting the programme.
How many people do you think are having a test when they don't need one?
About 25% of the people who come forward, we estimate, are not eligible for a test. And previously, because we haven't had this problem, and we want getting a test to be as easy as possible, we haven't put in place on the website to go through, strong requirements to prove the eligibility. I don't want to have to do that because I don't want to put a barrier for symptomatic people to get a test. But unfortunately, we have seen this quite sharp rise in the last couple of weeks of people without symptoms who don't have a good reason coming forward to getting a test. There have been stories of, whole schools or parts of schools being all sent to get a test. That is not acceptable. It is not an appropriate use of our testing resources. So we have record amount of testing, and we need to use it on people who are symptomatic.
Right, can I just put you...
Just before we finish on this, I also want to address this point to everybody who does come forward for testing. If you have symptoms, please keep coming forward and trying to get a test. We make tests available regularly so that you can get a test local to you. The vast majority of people do get a test local to them, and we're trying to stop the problem of people having to travel a long distance.
You say there are tests available. We've got one example from Simo in Birmingham. My son has had symptoms since Saturday, spent night and day trying to get a test, repeatedly told the system is down. He was on hold for 5 hours yesterday and then told there were no tests available, not even a home test.
Yeah. Well, I want to get him a test, and I'm therefore telling people who do not have symptoms. I've even heard stories of people saying, I'm going on holiday next week, therefore I'm going to go and get a test. No, that is not what the testing system's there for. The testing system is there to control this epidemic, and we've got to be firmer, I'm afraid, with the rules around eligibility for testing. We were able to be quite relaxed about that. But just to reassure you and your viewers, 90% of people get a test that's within 22 miles of where they live. So
and we've got. I've told you the examples of people who haven't been able to do that. Can I talk about the head of the government's testing programme?
I understand that, of course, and but the point that I'm trying to make is that the vast majority of people get tests close to them. The average distance people have to go to get a test is under 10 miles. Of course, as you described quite rightly, there are outliers. There are people who are being told a test is only available a long way away or that one isn't available. I want to sort that out, and part of sorting it out, yes, it means increasing capacity, and we're doing that, and we're at record levels.
Health Secretary, I do want to ask you something.
I'm just finishing my answer. It also means saying to people, if you're not eligible to get a test, then you can't go forward and just take one that might be needed for somebody who has symptoms.
The head of the government's testing programme, Sarah Jane Marsh, apologised yesterday. She said, apologies to anyone who cannot get a COVID test at present. She says, all of our testing sites have capacity, which is why they don't look overcrowded. It's our laboratory processing that is the critical pinch point. She doesn't mention people getting the other tests. What is going on with the laboratories?
Yeah, well, the lab capacity is increasing, as I say, all the time. It's at record levels. We are increasing it further. We've got new machines that are coming in all of the time. We've built this system from scratch over the last few months, and we've got record amounts of capacity. But the other thing we've seen, and the reason that there's a problem, is not lack of capacity, it is a demand from people who are not eligible for a test suddenly over the last 10 days or so coming forward in large numbers. And I'm just being very clear to people on your programme that I want to make sure that anybody who has symptoms can get a test. We've got plenty of tests for people with symptoms to come forward and get a test. But if you are not eligible for a test, then don't come forward and use up the tests that are there for somebody else.
Health Secretary, can I ask you, racing is due at Doncaster, many thousands of people due to be going there over the next few days. What's your thoughts on that? Should that be happening?
Well, the Prime Minister is going to set out more details of the consequences of the new rule for 6 people gathering later today, and we'll set out what that means for some of these events that we were planning to do.
OK, so there could be a change. And just really briefly, on the vaccine, we know that tests, it's been halted, the Oxford vaccine, at the moment. Are you concerned by that? Just briefly.
Well, obviously, I'd rather this went completely smoothly. However, we're absolutely clear that safety comes first with the vaccine. So there's been a pause while they investigate an incident. And this has happened before, and then the pause has been lifted. But it just shows how much of an emphasis we put on the safety of the vaccine, even though, of course, we're all desperate to see it work.
Health Secretary Matt Hancock, thank you for your time here on Breakfast.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.